Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Doctor is In podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nadia Saba. On this controlled environment agricultural podcast, we focus on optimizing the indoor plant environment for crops grown in greenhouses, vertical farms, indoor farms, plant factories, containers, and any other type of facility where we are trying to grow crops anytime and anywhere. So, for this episode, I wanted to focus on my predictions for 2025. There's no doubt 2024 was a challenging and transformative year for the controlled environment agriculture industry. We saw a slew of vertical farms shutter their operations, cannabis operations buckle under the weight of 280E and oversupply and not enough demand. And we saw producers race themselves to bottom level prices that risk really tanking an already financially shaky ship. These trends are happening across controlled environment agriculture. No crop, no facility type, and no state or region seems to be immune from these pressures. And it's honestly a little depressing. What we once saw as a vision of what agriculture could be, right? Local, circular, quality driven, and generally, quote unquote, better than, has in many ways turned into a farce. But with these challenges also comes great opportunity. 2025 looks to be a transformative year for CEA, an opportunity to regroup, step back, and really reconsider what it is that we want it to be and where we can and should take it within the greater ecosystem of what agriculture and farming is. So, with all that, from my vantage point, I see the following four trends take hold in 2025. So, prediction number one, there is going to be greater investment in improving existing and already operating CEA facilities. So in 2024, we at Dr. Greenhouse saw a slowdown in new construction CEA projects and an uptick of improving existing facilities. I think a lot of people in the industry saw a similar trend where there just wasn't a lot of new builds, right? Not a lot of investment in what could be, but more investment in how can we make what we already have better. And, I think high interest rates, inflation, and general uncertainty in CEA grown products have really helped drive this trend towards capital improvements. So rather than spend millions of dollars on a new facility that may or may not pan out, we're seeing that owners and investors are more willing to spend a fewer dollars on optimizing the facilities that they already have. So in 2025, we expect that this trend is going to continue, and we're going to see greater investment in replacing old or out of date equipment, permanently fixing band-aids rather than just continually adding band-aid upon band-aid upon band-aid, and installing new technology that's going to improve production outputs and reduce operating costs, ultimately improving the operational efficiency of these facilities that have the greatest opportunity to actually make a profit and grow quality product. Prediction number two is that in general, we think that there's going to be a lot more greenhouses in 2025. In 2024, we worked on fewer indoor CEA facilities and a lot more greenhouse related projects. We looked over the last 7 or 8 years of Dr. Greenhouse and noticed, like in the early years, maybe back in 2017, 2018, there were a lot of indoor projects, but there were also a lot of greenhouse projects. Then all of a sudden, there was this huge inflation of indoor projects in, 2020 to 2022, and greenhouses kind of getting pushed to the wayside. Well, in 2023 and 2024, we started to see an uptick in greenhouse projects and, just reduced energy and activity in these indoor facilities as they became, very expensive to operate. And people weren't figuring out, fast enough how to scale up in order to produce a low cost product that could compete, right, with maybe field produced products. And so, I really see that this trend is going to continue, right? We're going to scale back on the indoor farms that are expensive to operate, risky to build, and really require a lot of scaling and technology to make it work. That just quite isn't there yet. And so we're going to go back into greenhouses, which have been a tried and true technology or tool for farmers for decades. We're seeing higher prices for commercial and light industrial properties, infrastructure upgrades, and building materials that are really driving the cost, not just for indoor farms and greenhouses, but greenhouses in general tend to have lower first costs. Because we can build it on cheaper land that's, out in the sticks rather than in an urban environment, perhaps, and with fewer power hungry technologies, and honestly, usually a lot less regulation associated with those greenhouses, at least within, the building codes and energy codes. But greenhouses come with operational risk too if they don't have the right technology and grow team to operate them effectively and efficiently. For a very simple structure with fairly simple systems, usually, there's a lot of complexity because we are not immune to the outside conditions. So, we have to be paying attention to what's happening outside to understand what to do inside. And so, not every day is going to be the same like it is indoors, but, maybe those plants don't need to be exposed to the same environment day in and day out. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And so, I think as we move forward, we really are going to kind of return back to our roots and go back to greenhouses. Okay, so prediction three. I think that investors are going to want greater assurances that they are making a sound investment. With so many high profile failures of vertical farms and large scale greenhouse operations, as well as the overregulation and oversaturation of the cannabis market, investing in the CEA industry is looking pretty risky these days. Not to mention, there is a lack of knowledgeable and experienced engineers, contractors, and equipment vendors that historically oversold, over-engineered, and overcharged for solutions that didn't work. And, instead, in many ways, in many times, situations created a money pit for owners and investors, to fix operational and maintenance nightmares that our poor growers are having to deal with on a daily basis. So I think that to manage their investment risks in the future, hopefully that investors stay within our industry and are interested in investing in it. That they're going to require third-party technical reviews of the engineering designs, of the startup processes, and of equipment proposals. We have already been asked at Dr. Greenhouse to provide this level of peer review for both greenhouses and indoor farms, either from investors or from owner operators who just want a gut check, who just want a second set of eyes to make sure that what is being proposed to them is actually going to work, isn't overkill, right? Isn't going to cost them more than is necessary and is actually going to meet their operational goals. So I really think that we're going to see financial institutions, even private equity and venture capitalists ask for, more of this sort of underwriting to make sure that their investment is sound. Prediction four. More CEA projects are going to look to decarbonize their new and existing operations. So agriculture is responsible for about 10% of all the greenhouse gas emissions in the US and globally. If CEA is going to realize its vision, its lofty vision of reducing the environmental impact of food production, really our industry needs to do more of its part to curb its own carbon footprint. And so to help decarbonize the ag sector, I think many farms are going to abandon combustion-based processes and look to electrify them instead. For the CEA industry, this is going to lead to the use of less gas-fired boilers and unit heaters and possibly, hopefully, greater use of electric heat pumps, heat recovery systems, and renewable energy sources. Also, I think depending on the local source of electrical power, because we all know that depending on where you are, it's not always possible to get the power you need to electrify those systems, right? We may actually see more and more on farm cogeneration systems that will prove to be the lower carbon option compared to what the utility can offer. Here in the US, we have such a diverse source of electricity generation. In some places it's coal driven, in other places it's hydropower driven, in other places, it's solar and wind power. And so, just depending on, what you can get from your local or regional utility, how they're generating electricity, I do see that cogen and combined heat and power plants have a place within our sector. But just acknowledge that, they are challenging. We are asking growers a lot of times to operate a power plant in addition to a plant producing facility. And so, either way we look at it, I do think that CEA is going to have to take a closer look either through regulation or, through self-motivation of what can we do to reduce our impact on the environment and, decrease our carbon footprint. So those are basically my four predictions. One is that we're going to invest more in capital improvements of existing facilities. Two, we're going to invest more in greenhouse technology and greenhouses as opposed to indoor farms and vertical farms. Investors are going to look for underwriting and for, technical third-party reviews to assure that their investment is, a lower risk, I guess. And number four, we're going to see greater decarbonization and electrification within the ag sector, including in controlled environment agriculture. I mean, ultimately, if I wrap this all up, looking ahead into 2025, I really think we're going to focus more on what has been proven to work and can turn a profit, no matter how modest or marginal it could be. And for many, that solution is going to be greenhouses, new and old. They're simpler structures to design and construct. Oftentimes they have fewer regulations, tied to them. And rather than spend tens of millions of dollars on untested technology, costly lighting and HVAC systems, and inflated property values, I think investors are going to be seeking out lower risk portfolios that integrate operational efficiency. Not necessarily because it's good for the environment, but because it's good for the bottom line. But ultimately, that's a win-win situation that we really need to promote more. As we move through 2025, just on a personal note, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty in CEA, cannabis, and the financial markets. And I'm going to be thinking about, the four following questions as we move through the year. And as I think about the technology that's developing in the market that's kind of shifting, and even, the new administration in the US that has taken office. So these four questions that I have kind of in the back of my mind going forward are, number one, will there be 20 or 25% tariffs that drive greater demand for domestic grown produce and made in the USA products? But with that, though, how is that going to affect the cost of everything we need to construct and operate our farms? Honestly, whether that's a field farm, an indoor farm, or a greenhouse, right? So the cost for greenhouse glazing and control systems, that can increase, right? I mean, we get some control systems from Europe and from Canada, that are really popular here in the US. Glazing systems, a lot of times, right? The greenhouse cover gets produced in Europe. How is that going to add to the construction costs that US growers and investors are already saying are really high? And then, okay, now we've built our greenhouse or we're operating our indoor facility. how much extra cost is going to be added to our expenses to buy fertilizers, right? We've already seen fertilizer expenses increase because of what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. What about substrate? A lot of that also comes from Europe. So there's going to be, if these tariffs really come through, there's going to be a lot more pressure on all the building sectors, but really on on agriculture, and how do we build something new, how do we invest in improving what we have, and how do we just keep going, right? Even if we don't make investments in capital improvements or upgrades, right, we still have to operate our plant, right? And still grow our crop. And it's going to be more expensive. So, what is going to happen there? How is that going to affect our industry, and the predictions that I have made for it? The second question I have is around that idea of electrification and decarbonization. The Department of Energy, the state of California, New York, other jurisdictions and states, they have really been pushing towards electrifying everything. Is that going to continue? Or is that going to maybe slow down because they realize, well, this is really hard to implement? Or again, it's really expensive to buy those heat pumps that are coming from Europe and Asia. So, like we can't afford to do it. It was already going to be a technological challenge. Now it's going to become a really high, financial challenge and potential burden. The third question I have is, will universities and colleges continue to train the workforce that we really need, we desperately need to operate a productive and profitable CEA industry? I really feel like part of the reason why this industry hasn't done so well over the last few years is that we just didn't have the experience, right? We didn't have the educated staff and engineers and plant scientists and growers who, really took a deep dive into CEA before they were thrown into the deep end, right? They were just asked, go for it, right? Be an entrepreneur in everything that you're doing and invent something new and, sink or swim kind of mentality. And there was a lot of sinking that happened because they didn't have the support. They didn't have the education. They didn't have the resources. And so, for this industry, to continue its upward trajectory, I know right now we're kind of in, kind of this like flat period of growth. To bring it back up, its upward trajectory, we really need to continue educating the next generation workforce. And so I'm curious how universities and colleges are going to see this course correction as they create their course materials for the future of CEA, as well as what kind of facilities that they bring to their campuses in order to train their students, right, and educate the greater workforce and people who are out in the field doing it every day. The last question I think looms over a lot of my friends and colleagues and stakeholders, which is, are investors still going to be interested in the promise of CEA to feed the world? Or are they going to move on to AI or whatever the next shiny object is, and take their money with them and leaving us, to kind of bootstrap ourselves? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It was really fun when we had a lot of cash flow, right? And a lot of movement of money and a lot of investment in our dreams and our visions. But it was a risky venture, and people are impatient. Investors are impatient. We're impatient. We want things to work the first time or the second time or the third time. And it's really hard to admit when we've done something wrong or we've steered off course and we need to come back, and ground ourselves. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's going to be different. And I think that's why, we're going to see again, these investors really wanting to underwrite what it is they're financing, and we're going to see more improvement in the assets that are, laying fallow, so to speak, and just make them what they always could have been, just with a little bit more logic, I guess. So anyway, all these questions and more are going to really determine the future of CEA in this year and the years to come. And at Dr. Greenhouse, we are poised to help growers and investors and educators and regulators navigate, these questions and predictions and the challenges to moving this industry forward. And honestly, if my predictions come true, then we really do expect more people to seek out the greenhouse in Dr. Greenhouse. So I do look forward to that because I do love greenhouses, and I'm excited to come back out into the light with all of you and grow our crops efficiently and effectively using simpler technology, but knowing how to use it right and how to apply the right technology to it. So we're here to help all of you. I'm really curious to hear what your predictions are. I know there's a lot out there by many of my colleagues, but I'd love to hear from you, the growers and my listeners, about what you think is going to, take us into 2025 and beyond, what you hope is going to happen within the industry and what you think it might shake up the industry, maybe necessarily or unnecessarily. So thanks for listening. Again, I'm your host, Dr. Greenhouse. Well, I guess Dr. Nadia Saba, aka Dr. Greenhouse, and have a great 2025, everybody. Thanks.